The 19th century marked a transformative period in global and Philippine history. Economic changes, both global and local, directly influenced societal structures and the lives of individuals, including José Rizal. Understanding this context is essential to appreciating Rizal's nationalist ideas and their impact on Filipino identity. Welcome everyone. Our discussion today explores the interplay of economic forces and their role in shaping Filipino nationalism, highlighting Rizal as a product of his time and a voice for reform. Let us start by discussing the economic scenario of the world during the time of José Rizal. The world economic situations that contributed to Rizal's context of nationalism and the development of Filipino nationalism include Industrial Revolution, galleon trade, opening of the Suez Canal, opening of ports to world trade, rise of the export crop economy, and trade monopolies. The Industrial Revolution had influenced greatly Rizal and Filipino nationalism. Beginning in the late 18th century, significantly altered global trade and production started to proliferate in Europe. Mechanized industries in Europe increased demand for raw materials and markets for manufactured goods, integrating colonies like the Philippines into global trade networks. This heightened economic exploitation but also introduced modern ideas of liberalism and progress. Rizal, exposed to these ideals during his travels, incorporated them into his vision for a reformed Philippine society. Another economic world scenario that has a great impact on Rizal and Filipino nationalism is the galleon trade. The galleon trade, which monopolized Philippine commerce for over 2 centuries, ended in 1815. This event signaled the integration of the Philippines into a broader global economy. While the end of the trade disrupted traditional economic structures, it allowed for more diversified trade and greater exposure to global markets. Rizal's awareness of economic freedom and self-reliance can be partly attributed to these shifts. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 also contributed to Rizal's patriotism and Filipino nationalism. The Suez Canal drastically reduced travel time between Europe and Asia, facilitating the exchange of goods, people, and ideas. It also enabled Rizal and other Filipino intellectuals to study in Europe, where they were exposed to Enlightenment ideals and revolutionary movements, fueling their nationalist sentiments. The opening of Philippine ports to international trade contributed also to the characterization of Rizal's nationalism and the growth of Filipino nationalism. During the mid-19th century, several Philippine ports, including Manila and Iloilo, were opened to international trade. This increased the influx of foreign goods and capital while fostering a new class of Filipino entrepreneurs and middlemen. The economic opportunities and inequalities created by these changes influenced Rizal's critiques of colonial economic policies. The rise of the export crop economy had its fair share in Rizal's nationalism and Filipino patriotism. The shift toward an export crop economy, emphasizing sugar, abaca, and tobacco, tied the Philippines more closely to global markets. While this enriched a small elite, it deepened rural poverty and economic dependence. Rizal's writings highlight the plight of farmers and laborers, advocating for economic reforms to address these inequalities. Trade monopolies is another factor to the character of Rizal's nationalism, thereby Filipino nationalism. Colonial economic monopolies, particularly in tobacco and other key commodities, stifled competition and enriched colonial officials at the expense of Filipino producers. Rizal's denunciations of these monopolies in his novels underscore their role in perpetuating social and economic injustices. The 19th-century global economic transformations exposed the Philippines to new ideas, trade opportunities, and inequalities. These shifts played a crucial role in shaping Filipino consciousness and Rizal's nationalist ideas. The Industrial Revolution, opening of the Suez Canal, and the rise of global trade highlighted the importance of economic reforms and the empowerment of the Filipino people, themes central to Rizal's writings and advocacy. After discussing the world economic situations that affected the development of Filipino nationalism, we now focused on the 19th-century Philippine economic situations, not only Filipino nationalism but also the perspectives of José Rizal's nationalism. In this topic, we will examine how various colonial economic policies and systems, from the encomienda system to the tobacco monopoly, shaped Filipino identity and contributed to the burgeoning nationalist movement. Rizal's analysis of these historical forces provides crucial insights into the development of Filipino national consciousness. Let us begin with the encomienda system. The encomienda system, granting Spanish conquistadores control over land and indigenous labor, formed the bedrock of early colonial rule. This system fostered exploitation and abuse, sowing the seeds of resentment and resistance among the Filipino population. It created a rigid social hierarchy that privileged the colonizers, laying the groundwork for future nationalist sentiments. Rizal condemned the encomienda system for its inherent injustice and its detrimental impact on the Filipino people, viewing it as a root cause of social and economic inequality. The encomienda system, while enriching Spain, created a climate of injustice and inequality that fueled the nascent flames of Filipino nationalism and profoundly influenced Rizal's understanding of colonial oppression. Having discussed the exploitative nature of the encomienda system, we now turn to the tributo, a form of taxation imposed on the indigenous population. The tributo became another instrument of colonial oppression. Its arbitrary nature and economic burden further exacerbated existing grievances, contributing to a growing sense of collective identity among Filipinos. Rizal criticized the tributo as an unjust burden on the Filipino people, further solidifying his anti-colonial stance. The tributo, a symbol of colonial subjugation, played a significant role in fostering a shared sense of grievance and identity among Filipinos, contributing to the development of nationalist sentiment, a sentiment echoed in Rizal's writings. Following the discussion on the tributo, we now examine the polo y servicio, the system of forced labor imposed on Filipinos. This practice disrupted traditional livelihoods and reinforced the perception of Filipinos as second-class citizens, fueling the desire for self-determination. Rizal viewed polo y servicio as a manifestation of colonial exploitation, further strengthening his commitment to advocating for Filipino rights and autonomy. The hardship and exploitation inherent in the polo y servicio system further galvanized Filipino resistance and contributed to the growing sense of national identity, a theme central to Rizal's concept of nationalism. Moving from forced labor, we now analyze the galleon trade. While generating economic activity, it primarily benefited the Spanish elite and neglected the needs of the Filipino people. This economic disparity further highlighted the inequalities of colonial rule and contributed to the growing discontent that fueled nationalist aspirations. Rizal criticized the galleon trade for its perpetuation of economic imbalance and its failure to benefit the Filipino people. The galleon trade, while economically significant, exacerbated existing social and economic disparities, further fueling Filipino desires for autonomy and self-governance, ideals that resonated deeply with Rizal's vision of a free Philippines. Shifting our focus from trade, we now examine Governor Bosco's economic reforms, including the Economic Society of the Friends of the Country and the tobacco monopoly. While intended to modernize the Philippine economy, these reforms often had unintended consequences that further marginalized Filipinos. Rizal viewed these reforms with skepticism, recognizing that they often served to reinforce colonial control rather than genuinely benefit the Filipino people. While presented as modernizing measures, Governor Bosco's reforms often perpetuated existing inequalities and contributed to the growing sense of Filipino national consciousness, a development that shaped Rizal's understanding of the complexities of colonial rule. Having discussed economic reforms, we now turn to the issue of agricultural unrest. Stemming from land disputes and economic hardship, agricultural unrest became a powerful catalyst for nationalist sentiment. These struggles highlighted the inherent inequalities of colonial rule and fostered a sense of shared identity and purpose among Filipinos. Rizal recognized the significance of these struggles and their contribution to the growing national consciousness. Agricultural unrest, born from the injustices of colonial land policies and economic practices, played a crucial role in solidifying Filipino national identity and fueling the desire for self-determination, themes that resonated strongly with Rizal's own nationalist ideals. Finally, we examine the Royal Company of the Philippines. While intended to stimulate trade, it often exacerbated existing economic inequalities and further marginalized Filipino merchants. This contributed to the growing resentment against colonial rule and fueled the desire for economic independence. Rizal criticized the Royal Company for its perpetuation of economic imbalance and its failure to benefit the Filipino people. The Royal Company of the Philippines, while intended to promote economic growth, ultimately contributed to the growing discontent and fueled the desire for economic autonomy, a key element of Rizal's vision for a free Philippines. In conclusion, from the exploitative encomiendas system to the unjust tributo and the forced labor of polo y servicio, these colonial mechanisms created a climate of oppression and inequality that fueled the desire for self-determination. Rizal's critical analysis of these systems and his unwavering advocacy for Filipino rights and autonomy remain central to understanding the complexities of Filipino nationalism and its enduring legacy. The 19th-century economic changes, both global and local, significantly influenced the development of Filipino nationalism. They provided the backdrop for Rizal's nationalist ideals, as he sought to address the injustices and inequalities perpetuated by colonial economic policies. Understanding this context is essential for appreciating Rizal's contributions to Philippine history and his enduring legacy as a nationalist and reformer.